All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Well, as we started this session, I wanted to thank everyone for joining. I wanted to go ahead and start with a short poll, so go ahead and answer these questions. Choose the answer that really best fits your situation, and we'll review the results in about a minute. Okay, let's go ahead and end this. So the two questions were, the first one, are you currently running any visual tests today? About 40% said yes. About 50% said, no, I'm not. About 10% said all the time. That's great. The next question was, do you test any responsive web apps that use Storybook for component UI libraries? About 20% of the folks said yes. The rest said no. Want to make sure you guys can see my screen? Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining wherever you're joining in the world. My name is Ian Flanagan, and I'm a Senior Solutions Engineer at Sauce Labs. And today we'll be giving a demo and a talk of the Sauce Visual Component Testing offering. I'm going to start with a few slides that set the context of what visual component testing is, why it's important, and then we'll go in and do a deeper dive and give an actual demo of the product. Over the last several years, there's been a major trend in application development, which is called the rise of the front end. More app features, code, and business logic are being created in the front end, and this has made testing of the front end applications even more complex and time-consuming for both development and QA teams. And more than ever, for application teams, there's a need to conduct more front-end app testing. To address this rise in front-end app development, there have been new approaches to how UI applications are developed, namely with the rise of popular component-based frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue, and design systems. Now, these are collections of reusable components which can be shared and reused across teams and projects to build a variety of different apps. Building UIs using components has some benefits, and I've listed some of them here. Dev and QA teams can isolate UI components for development and testing. These component libraries can be shared and reused across teams, which allows teams to shift left for faster feedback, which ultimately leads to faster development. So as we think about these challenges, we should also ask some important questions. The main goal is that all teams share is they want to move faster, but without breaking their current UI. Using Sauce Visual, we enable teams to move faster without breaking their UI in the process. And for this to happen, I think we all agree that automation is essential. So moving to these new types of application approaches comes with its fair share of challenges. And again, I've listed a few of them here. Namely, automating UI tests is time consuming. As the application grows in complexity, so do the UI automated tests. There's an increased need to test both functional and visual aspects of the UI. And in order to maintain quality and increase velocity, QA and dev teams, it requires buy-in. And in order to overcome these sort of challenges, teams need to develop a culture of continuous testing. So, if you're doing component UI testing, what if you didn't need to create any tests or write any assertions? What if you didn't need to maintain UI code as your application changes? What if you could automatically generate tests for every UI state or automatically get visual and functional test coverage, all by integrating into your current natural workflow? Sauce Visual integrates with a popular component development environment called Storybook. So developers develop their components in Storybook, and with Sauce's visual integration, they can automatically get UI tests without having to build or maintain any automation code. This allows teams to test every component automatically, catch visual and functional regressions early, test their UI applications across different browsers and screen resolutions, and integrate into their current CI pipeline today. So what would be an ideal candidate for somebody that was interested in using Sauce Visual? So if you're using Storybook with component UI libraries, if you have a responsive web app that's built with React or Angular JS, if your team needs fast feedback, and perhaps your team or company doesn't want to invest the time in writing automation or hiring additional resources. So without any further ado, we will go ahead and jump into the product demo. So as you can see here on the left, we have our set list. This is our Sauce Visual UI. On the left-hand side, I'm clicked on all projects. I could also click on recent builds. We're going to cover this portion in a minute. The first thing we're going to do is walk you through how you would create a project from scratch. So I'm going to click on this plus button here. I'm going to click next. I'm going to type in the name of my project. If I had any specific Storybook server options, I would enter them here. I don't in this particular example, so we're going to go with public. And the next thing here is you notice it's generated some code for us. So we're going to create manually a screener.config.js file. We're going to put that file in the root directory of our application. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to copy this code snippet and we're going to cut and paste this into that particular file. Now you notice here, this is an API key. This is the key that I'm going to pass in when I run my test that authenticates against the Sauce Visual product. This is very much analogous to a Sauce access key for existing Sauce Labs users. You should be very familiar with that. But I wanted to point out a couple of things here really quickly. This wouldn't necessarily be a best practice, so I'm just showing you this within the context of the demo. When we get into the live demo, I'm passing this in as an environment variable, which is obviously a best practice. So we'll go ahead and click next. Here is where I'm going to install my Screener Storybook npm dependency package. And then in my package.json file, I'm going to go ahead and add this particular line in there. And then I would go ahead and select next. And this is the line that I would run in my CI tool when I kick off a test. This is really the only line that I need to add in my CI tool. So now what we're going to do is jump over to Jenkins. And I'm going to show you a particular, this is a project that I have set up that's going to run a test against Sauce Visual. And we can see here that I'm pulling my application from Git. This is where I'm passing in my API key. Obviously, this is going to be unique to each project. So if I create a different project, I'll have a different key. I'm passing in the project name, but that's not necessarily a requirement. And then if we scroll down to the very bottom here, a couple of the lines we saw when we built our project. So if you were going to run this from Jenkins, for example, you would have this line, you would have this line, and then down at the very bottom here, this is the line that I just showed you in the Sauce Visual product. You notice that I have a bunch of other steps in here. So what I'm doing here is I went in and created some new files that I made changes to, and we're going to override the files, which would simulate if someone had made a change to the product. So we're going to go ahead and run this. And we can go ahead and click on this. So we're showing you here how to kick off a test in Jenkins, but you could use Circle CI, Microsoft Azure DevOps. We integrate with just about any CI tool out there. So Sauce Visual also integrates into pull requests and statuses. So the product integrates directly with GitHub, as many teams are already using GitHub and reviewing pull requests and code updates. Sauce Visual can add a status update into the pull request so users can be notified in a single location when there are visual regressions, and they can perform a review alongside a code review prior to merging the PR. Sauce Visual also performs automatic baselining and branching. So for example, let's say you had a branch that's master, you create a feature branch, Sauce Visual automatically pulls baseline for the master to be used for the new feature branch. So after accepting changes in the PR, which is then merged into the master baseline will also be automatically updated when the PR is merged. This ultimately saves time, reduces builds, and ensures that your baselines stay in sync. So let's go back over here, and we can see that our build is running here against the Sauce Visual. So let's go back and see where we at with the project. So it looks like our build finished. So we scroll all the way down to the very bottom here. We can see that we found 7 visual regressions and the build failed. So let's go into Sauce Visual. Let's look at a recent build. A couple of things I wanted to point out here. So this project, this build ran in 28 seconds from Jenkins. Okay, so this 5x parallelism, my concurrency with the Sauce Visual product is 16 VMs, but it will determine what is the most optimal number of VMs to use for the job I'm running. So I have access to up to 16, but it ran across 5. If I expand in the logs, I can see the default browser that we're using is Chrome, but later in the presentation, I'm going to show you how you could run across other browsers if you wanted to do that. This is the log that we could click on, and it provides more detailed information about the tests that were run. If we go back here, we also notice this is build 90. I could click back on build history. These are all the previous builds that we've done, and I could get detailed information about builds that have passed or failed. So at the bottom down here, you see that there are 7 changes. So we're going to go ahead and click on review the 7 that had changed. Okay, now we're seeing here 7 different visual regressions. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up one of these visual regressions so we can see it. So before we go into any more detail, I want to briefly talk about how Sauce Visual performs these visual comparisons. Other tools out in the market perform what's called a pixel-based comparison, which can generate many false positives. Sauce Visual does something different. It's what we call a smart hybrid diff. So it's taking both a screenshot and a DOM snapshot to form its comparison, which gives it 2 very unique perspectives. Now with the image data from the snapshot and the programmatic data from the DOM snapshot, it allows the product to have a deeper understanding of how the application is structured. So let's go ahead and dig into this particular visual regression that was found. We can, if we click on this arrow bar right here, we can see that there were a couple of layout changes, a style change, and a content change. So Sauce Visual has 4 different comparison modes: structure, layout, style, and content. So let's look at one of these changes here. This was a style change. Or let's look at this. Yeah, let's look at the style change. So we're going to highlight that. We can see that the text changed here and the regenerate API key moved to a different part of the screen. I have a couple of different options here. So if we went back to the very beginning, I could have accepted all the changes blindly, but ideally that's not a best practice. You probably want to go through and look at what things have changed. So if I wanted to go through and accept this change, I could do it. I could also reject it. So just to quickly digress, when I was walking you through to setting up the project for the first time, when you run this for the very first time, the build is going to fail because it has no baseline. It has nothing to compare it to. So the very first time you run it, it's going to fail. You're going to accept or reject any of the changes. That moment forward, it's going to create a baseline. So every subsequent test after that, it's going to compare against that baseline. So previously accepted says, this was the baseline. This is the current version of what the product, what has changed. You notice this is orange. So things that have changed visually on the screen, we're going to highlight in orange. Things that have been removed the screen, we're going to highlight in red. And things that were added to the screen, we're going to show in blue, just to give you some background on that. So we'll go back. Let's look at another example. So we can see we have a content change here. The text visually changed. We can see that here. So that's a context change. We have another layout change here. So if I toggle highlights and then highlight this, I can close this and I can see exactly what changed on the screen, comparing it to my baseline against my current version. If I wanted to click on this arrow again, I could click on history, so I could get the history for this specific test. If I wanted to go back and say, you know, what happened in build 89? Did this test pass? Did it fail? I have the ability to do that. So in this example, we have a style change. We can see, we tell you exactly what changed here, the background color. We can see that the button changed from no blue background from the baseline to the current build. And then finally, We also have a content change. We can see the text changed in this example. So if I was going to go through and do a comparison and look at any visual regressions, I could do this. Obviously, I'm doing this for each individual one that had changed. But if I wanted to just accept all the changes, I could do that. So this one is a structure change. We can see here that the text on the left was from the baseline has been removed and it's highlighted in red. And we can see in the current build that that doesn't exist. So again, just going back here, I can accept the change, I can reject it, I can get some more detailed information here about this particular test in the logging. We'll go back to the index. So we've kind of gone through a few examples here. Let's just say I wanted to accept all of these as accepted. Go back, and my build now suddenly moved to success. Okay, so the next time I run this, this is going to be my new baseline, and it's going to key off this new baseline. So a couple other things to point out around documentation. So if we click on docs here, and some of this came up as we went through the demonstration, but if I wanted to add baseline or branching to my configuration, I could click on that here. This kind of outlines the workflow and what's happening behind the scenes. And then in my screener config.js, I would add this line to my configuration. If I wanted to test across different browsers, different devices or resolutions, I could do that. These are all emulators and simulators, but I could add these to my configuration and test across different resolutions or different devices or different configurations. Also, from the cross-browser, the default browser used by Sauce Visual is Chrome, as we saw in our example, but if I wanted to test on Firefox or Internet Explorer, I could do that. I could also run this across other browsers as well, and desktop browsers as well. So one final thing to point out here was we have the include-exclude rules. So if we go back to my particular example, which is here, you notice that I had include rules. So these are different UI components that I'm only interested in testing against. If I remove this, it would test against all of my UI components for my application. But I wanted to simplify and make the test a little more streamlined. So if we go back here, this is the lines I would add to my configuration to do that. And if you go back here to the dashboard and we looked at our test, you notice we ran across 25 UI states. So this is going to vary depending on your application, but you have the ability to include certain UI components that you want to test. Conversely, you also have the ability to exclude certain UI components that you don't want to test. So hopefully that makes a whole lot of sense regarding that. So I'm going to go back to the deck. Hopefully you guys can see my screen here. Well, hopefully this provided an overview of some of Sauce's visual capabilities today. So if this is something that you'd like to understand in more detail or see how it might work for you or your teams, feel free to reach out to your sales rep or your customer success manager. And at this point, I know we only have a few minutes left. I'd like to open it up for a Q&A. So one of the questions, is Sauce Visual integrated with Travis CI? The answer is yes. One of the other questions that came up, and I'm sure people are wondering about this, if you have a web application that does not use Storybook for your UI component libraries, we have a generic runner that you can easily, seamlessly integrate, which will allow you to also get some of these capabilities as well. The other question was, do you have something similar for mobile devices? The current version of Sauce Visual runs on emulators and simulators. We are looking at extending that for real devices. So that's a great question. Oh, okay. So the other question was meant to being able to do UI comparison on mobile applications, not necessarily real devices. That is also something we're considering. At this point, it's responsive web applications. I believe we've answered all the questions. Well, great. Well, thank you guys for your time. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good morning, evening, afternoon. I know a lot of folks have connected from different places as far as Switzerland and who knows where else. So thank you all so much. Hopefully this was helpful and beneficial, and we'll talk again soon.